The Life of Christ, 23. Conclusion of the last day of Christ's public ministry, prophetic discourses, and conversations. So obviously evil was not finally defeated if he had spiritual guidance for people to continue to defeat evil. But Matthew 23, 24, 25, 1 through 13, verses 31 through 46 also, 26, 1 through 16, Mark 12, 38 through 44, 13, 1 and 2, 14, 1 and 2, Luke 20, 45 through 47, 13, 34 and 35, 21, 1 through 6, 22, 1 through 6, his indigent exposure of the character of the Jewish religious leaders, Matthew 23, 1 through 36, Mark 12, 38 through 40, Luke 20, 45 through 47, ostentatious in the religion, Matthew 23, 1 through 6, eager for popular approbation, contrary to the spirit of true religion, verses 7 through 12, hypocritical in their prayers and proselytism, 13 through 15, corrupt in their teachings, making fanciful distinctions where none exists, 16 through 22, their religion outward, particular to practice the cheap virtues but disregarding the more costly, 23 through 28, verses, worshippers of the past, building monuments to the memory of those whom they themselves would have slain, 29 through 32, deadly and poisonous in their influence, wicked and cruel toward the divine messengers, 33 through 39, lamentation over Jerusalem on account of the sins of its leaders, 37 through 39, Luke 13, 34 and 35. See, you don't build shrines over the graves and say, oh, well, look at how the great religious past is. Like, bring it about now. Thank you very much. Lamentation over Jerusalem on account of the sins of its leaders, 37 through 39, Luke 13, 34 and 35. The small contribution of the poor widow, such offerings more valuable in God's sight than the treasures of the rich, Mark 12, 41 through 44, Luke 21, 1 through 4. Greek proselytes ask for an introduction to Jesus. He shows them that there is no worldly advantage to be expected by accepting him. Well, I don't know if I showed that thing that I found and, backed it because it was just so, are you ready to accept Christianity? You're going to get beat down. And it's like, what? No. The spiritual benefit, great and glorious, must come, if at all, through his own death and self-renunciation of his followers, John 12, 20 through 26. I mean, this is by Methodists. It wasn't a Methodist thing. I don't remember what church it was. But Jesus, oppressed in spirit, cries out in prayer, the heavenly voice and the effect on the people, 27 through 30. The great crisis at hand, Christ to be lifted up in order that he may draw all men to him, questioning of the people as to his meaning. Jesus' parting exhortation to accept him as the light of the world, lest they stumble, 31 through 36, the close of his public teaching, and his final withdrawal from the temple, rejected of his own people, fulfillment of prophecy, 36 through 41. He reproves the moral timidity of those chief men who were convinced of his real character but were afraid to acknowledge him. In rejecting him, they denied God, loving the praise of men. Instead, 42 through 50, he retires with his disciples. They call his attention to the magnificent architecture of the temple and its splendid adornments. He predicts the utter overthrow of all of these. Matthew 22, 14, verse 1 and 2, Mark 13, 1 and 2, Luke 11, 5 and 6, the threefold inquiry of the disciples as he sat down with them on the Mount of Olives, it sounds different in references like this than it does when you talk about the Essene community in the Mount of Olives. But remember, there's references like Islam believes in the person that went into the Jesus story that's 100 years earlier than people tend to think. He enjoins upon them sobriety of judgment, rumors of extraordinary events, great excitements and fierce wars, not necessarily precursors of the final catastrophe. Matthew 24, 3-8, fierce persecutions to befall his followers, and they are to be hated even to death. In these many will lose faith and apostatize, endurance and salvation. 9-13, so salvation by your own steadfastness. General spread of the gospel before the final destruction of Jerusalem, the awful calamities attending this destruction, Christians warned by indications which he now suggests to flee from the city. 14-22, they are not to be imposed upon by rumors of extraordinary occurrences and of Christ's reappearance, attempted deception. When Christ comes, his coming will be palpable to all. 23-28, second advent described, natural signs of its proximity. The time unknown to all men and angels, the event analogous to that of the flood, duty of watchfulness, verse 36-51, and it's also unknown to Jesus as well. But by natural signs, speak to people of spirituality based on what they know, right? That's why, look at my interview questions and the question list. Their beliefs and their experiences, how they might phrase things, and, Parable of the 10 Virgins, necessary perpetual vigilance, 25, verses 1-13. Some thought illustrated by parable of servants waiting for their master, Luke 12, 36-38. Illustration of the character of the general judgment, separation of the good and the bad, the principles which determine this separation and destiny, eternal reward and punishment, Matthew 25, verse 31-46. The disciples reminded that the Passover is at hand and that it is to be accompanied by his own betrayal, Matthew 26, verse 1 and 2, Mark 14, 1, Luke 22, 1. Priests and scribes plot for his arrest, but are fearful of taking any open action. Judas yields to the temptation of Satan and offers, for a sum of money, to betray the Lord, his spiritual master. Either way, you don't betray anybody, just because, and you don't. The priests and scribes, if they believed it was the right thing, why are they holding back because of popular opinion? There's something wrong with that too. They eagerly accept his proposition, Matthew 26, 3-16, Mark 14, 1 and 2, and also verses 10 and 11, Luke 22, verses 2-6, John 13, 2.